Every year, millions of people flock to national parks in the United States for various reasons. Some of these people are seeking the adrenaline rush that only Mother Nature can provide. They want to scale Half Dome at the eastern end of Yosemite National Park or sandboard on the Great Sand Dunes of Colorado. Others are looking for a way to get closer to nature and find peace in their souls without the insistent buzzing of cell phone notifications. Usually, gaining entrance to one of these vast parks will only run you a couple of bucks, and with 58 parks located in 27 states, most of us live within driving distance to at least one or two. And with so many people visiting these areas day after day, they have stories to tell of beautiful scenery and amazing natural wonders. But many of these visitors have also reported experiencing some incredibly creepy and near unbelievable things as well. Campers have reported hearing strange noises floating through the trees after dark, disembodied voices, blood-curdling screams, the sound of drums, even whistling. But there were no other souls around for miles. Bigfoot, aliens, animals behaving strangely, dark figures. Regulars and first-timers alike have their fair share of strange and unusual phenomena to report, not to mention the massive amounts of people who vanish in national parks every year, and they are never heard from again. Today, we barely touch on the tip of the iceberg of the creepy things that can be found in these national parks. And we have to decide, is this strange and unusual or just unbelievable? But before we dive into today's strange and unusual tale, let's have the word from the sponsor of today's video, Helix Sleep. I feel like these days, society is sort of telling us that we have to keep pushing. Like, you can sleep when you're dead, right? We hear that all the time. And while I admire a good hustle, I also know that I'm going to be useless to myself and everyone else if I don't take care of the one body that I have. And that's why I love sleeping on my Helix mattress. Helix Sleep makes premium mattresses and bedding that are customized to fit your needs, and they're conveniently shipped right to your door. Everyone's different. We have different needs, different body types, different sleep positions, and Helix knows that. So they created a quick sleep quiz to match your unique body type and sleep preference so that you can find the perfect mattress for you. I took the quiz and I was matched with the Midnight Luxe mattress. I've been sleeping on it for over 2 years now, and I was a bit skeptical at first, because it came in like this little box, but I was sold on this mattress within 1 month of sleeping on it. So was my husband. So were all my kids, who somehow find their way into our bed almost every single night. I'm also an independent kind of girl, right? I like my freedom, but at the end of the day, when the lights are off and the work is done, I also like to feel supported, and that is what the Midnight Luxe mattress does for me. It has my back, literally. I'm a side sleeper, which I can sometimes get twisted up into these weird pretzel formations when I'm sleeping, and I used to wake up feeling really sore. It would take a good hour to lose the stiffness in the morning after I woke up. But my back has never felt better since using my Helix Sleep mattress, which was so easy to shop for and purchase online, by the way. And when it comes to your door, like I said, it's in this little box and you're like, my mattress is in there? My king mattress is in there? I don't know about this, but listen, you pull it out, you let it expand, which is super cool, and all of a sudden you're standing in front of a heavenly cloud ready to cradle you off into dreamland. Helix Sleep has changed the way I sleep, and it can do the same for you. So click on the link below or go to helixsleep.com/Harlowe for up to $200 off your Helix Sleep mattress plus 2 2 free pillows. Once again, that is helixsleep.com/Harlowe. Harlowe is spelled Harlowe for up to $200 off your Helix Sleep mattress plus 2 free pillows. The pillows are amazing. So thank you so much to Helix for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another strange and unusual video. In 2015, a Reddit thread popped up on the internet, allegedly written by a search and rescue officer who was working for the National Park Services. This person wrote about a variety of strange tales, things they had seen and heard while out in the wilderness searching for lost people. And while all of these stories contained elements of the mysterious, it was the last story that seemed to catch the attention of most people. The original poster wrote, quote, "This is the last one I'll tell, and it's probably the weirdest story I have." Now, I don't know if this is true in every SAR unit, but in mine, it's sort of an unspoken regular thing we run into. You can try asking about it with other SAR officers, but even if they know what you're talking about, they probably won't say anything about it. We've been told not to talk about it by our superiors, and at this point, we've all gotten so used to it that it doesn't even seem weird anymore. On just about every case where we're really far into the wilderness, I'm talking 30 or 40 miles, at some point we find a staircase in the middle of the woods. It's almost like if you took the stairs in your house, cut them out, and put them in the forest. I asked about it the first time I saw some, and the other officer just told me not to worry about it and that it was normal. Everyone I asked said the same thing. I wanted to go check them out, but I was told very emphatically that I should never go near any of them. I just sort of ignore them now when I run into them because it happens so frequently. End quote. The original poster also claimed that one of his coworkers had seen a staircase that was flipped upside down in the woods, and he said, quote, "I guess it would be like if you had a dollhouse and the stairs were a separate piece. Now take that, flip it upside down so the top step is stuck in the dirt, and put it in the woods." End quote. At first glance, or upon first read, the Reddit poster's claims, while incredibly spooky, they seem to be ridiculous and completely fabricated. However, there have been reports for years of many people coming across these structures in the woods, and there are even pictures to corroborate some of their stories. These mysterious staircases have been spotted in at least 7 countries, and they share a lot of similarities. They are usually made from all different types of materials, from stone to brick to wood. Some of them are intricate, while some are plain. Some are spiral staircases, while some travel straight up into the sky with no destination in sight. Most of these staircases are found in national parks, far from any form of civilization, and in areas where people have never been known to live. There are even a few instances of these stairs being built over bodies of water, like lakes. And while the staircases are in all different states of decay and deterioration, they are usually reported as being free from vegetation and very clean, considering their location in the middle of the woods. Those who have come across the staircases say that the stairs leading up are free from dust, dirt, and vegetation. They're sometimes found near cemeteries or burial grounds, and the wildlife of the area, they seem to avoid these staircases like the plague. Many times there's no sign of any other structure being built around the stairs. No basement, no cellar, no crumbling foundation, nothing. Just the staircase in the middle of the trees leading up to nothing. At least, nothing that we can see. Underneath this post, many others commented to also share their own firsthand experiences. Reddit user DaneTrain05 replied, quote, "I live in Wisconsin. I've only seen one staircase like this, and when we went to it, everything just felt off. Like we didn't feel scared, but we felt unwelcome. Like we shouldn't be on the stairs. It was very weird for the middle of the day. Nice, sunny, then feeling dread. Like if we didn't leave by our own accord, something would make us." End quote. Another user, Jeep Dave, also replied, writing, quote, "How about that? I didn't realize the stairs were that common. Came across a set in rural West Virginia. I don't think it was quite 40 miles deep, but at least 10 or better. I thought maybe a house had stood there, but there was no cellar or other debris that would indicate a home was there before. Just a set of stairs with a base that went up maybe one flight, 16 steps if I remember right, and sturdy. Could barely shake them. I didn't climb up, though. Worried it might break or fall over, and I was alone. End quote. Another online reader, Oaktem, said, quote, "Wow, OP, stairs in the woods are a thing where I'm from, but we know that we shouldn't go near them and avoid them when we run into one. That's what I've been told by my family, like anybody else in my country for generations. I suggest you listen to your superiors and not even talk about the stairs. It gives me the chills, even when I'm writing about them here." End quote. A man who wrote an article for Travalia in 2019 reported that he was hiking through some isolated woods with some friends when a 5-year-old boy who was with them ran ahead, and when they finally caught up to the boy, he was sitting on a staircase that led to nowhere. Matt claims that as the rest of the group approached the stairs, they felt they were almost being drawn towards the staircase. But when they got close enough to actually step onto the stairs, the 5-year-old boy jumped off the stairs and immediately insisted that they needed to go. For the rest of the day, this little boy was quiet and behaving oddly, and when he was asked if everything was all right, he told the group that he was with that when he had come across the stairs in the woods, he had felt this energy or force that seemed to be compelling him towards the strange structure. He claimed that in that moment, everything else melted away, and all he could see was the staircase looming in front of him. There are many well-known stories of staircases like these in the woods. Some seem to be explainable while others are not. In the forests of France, there can be found a beautiful and intricate spiral staircase built around one lone tree. It's clear by looking at this staircase that whoever constructed it had great skill in woodworking, and they put a lot of time, care, and effort into it. Yet at the top, there's no platform, no tree house, no clear reason why the staircase would have been built there and then abandoned and not used. And no one has ever returned to it or claimed credit for its construction. Historically, there have been reports from a man who claims to have worked as an infectious disease expert for the CDC in the 1940s. He alleged that after the Roswell, New Mexico crash, multiple reports of animal mutilations began to surface, and the CDC was brought in to investigate. The researchers and investigators had only planned to be in Roswell for a few short months, tops, but the investigation ended up taking over half a year. In the forested areas around Roswell, various people had reported seeing a set of wooden steps that were giving off some sort of frequency, which caused anyone nearby to feel off balance and uneasy. A group of campers had come upon these steps, and not knowing what they were and not feeling too suspicious, they made their campsite about 100 feet from them. The next morning when they woke up, the campers discovered that the steps had somehow moved during the night, and on the spot where the stairs had previously been, the ground appeared black and charred, as if it had been burnt somehow. Over the next 2 days and nights, the staircase continued to disappear and then reappear several feet away from its previous location, and 6 days later, the stairs vanished again, but they never reappeared. Right before this, investigators from the CDC had been called in, and they had attempted to chip a piece of wood off the staircase for testing, but they claimed the wood was as hard as steel, and they were unable to get a piece of it for testing. The investigators did determine that there was some sort of frequency emitting from the stairs before they vanished for good, but they could never figure out who was sending it or who was receiving it. Another story involves 2 friends from Sweden, Axel and Isaac. The 2 young men were out hiking in the woods, and they'd been walking for miles before they entered a clearing. In the center of that clearing, they saw a large staircase that apparently led to nowhere. Axel immediately felt uneasy, and he began to back away, but Isaac was intrigued, and he decided to climb the stairs to see where they led. As soon as Isaac's foot touched the top stair, both men heard what they described as a loud, piercing scream that terrified even the adventurous Isaac, and Axel began to run with Isaac close behind him. Axel continued to run through the woods, hearing the gasping breaths of his friend behind him, and when he felt that he had run far enough, Axel stopped to catch his breath. As he stood there, hands on his thighs, gulping for breath, Axel felt the cold touch of a hand on his shoulder, and thinking that it was his friend Isaac, he turned around, but there was no one standing behind him. Isaac was there, also gasping for breath, but he was several feet away, too far to have reached out and placed his hand on Axel's shoulder. Later, Axel would tell people that he was sure there had been a third person or presence with them in the woods that day, and whoever or whatever it was had a touch as cold as ice. In another story, a ranger named Torek was journeying through a jungle in the Philippines, searching for a couple of tourists who had wandered off the trails. And while he was searching, he came across 2 abandoned staircases amongst the trees. He said that the staircases, they were made out of stone and they looked sturdy enough, so Torek climbed one of them, hoping to get a better view of the dense foliage around him and hopefully locate the people that he was looking for. As he was climbing the stairs, Torek claims that an aggressive dog emerged from the trees and approached the base of the staircase, and this dog began growling at him and pacing around as if he was waiting for Torek to come down so that he could attack him. Torek claimed that the dog stalked him for a few hours before finally moving on, allowing Torek to come down the stairs safely and return to the ranger station where he was employed. But when he arrived, he was stunned when he was informed that he was no longer employed there. Torek claims to have been in the jungle for several hours, about half the day, but his supervisor told him that he had not been seen in 5 years. There are obviously many theories about what these staircases are and why they have been seemingly dropped into the middle of nowhere. The theories range from thought-provoking to terrifying to completely illogical to somewhat logical, but none have been able to actually explain the presence of these staircases, at least not all of the staircases. One of the most popular theories, and in my opinion, the most interesting, is that these staircases lead to another dimension and parallel universes. This may sound like something ripped straight out of a very creatively written science fiction novel, but in recent years there has been some true scientific evidence which points to the probability of these alternate realities. The multiverse is a theory in which the universe that we inhabit is not the only one, and this idea has actually been around for a very long time. Hugh Everett was a brilliant mathematician and quantum theorist who believed that the space outside of Earth and outside of our own galaxy was large and most likely infinite. He also believed that this infinite space was home to many universes that lay parallel to each other. When Everett was a student at Princeton University, he and 2 of his classmates, they were drinking and talking about scientific stuff that I probably will never be able to understand, even if I was completely sober. And I think we've all done this, or at least I hope we've all done this, because getting drunk or getting high and talking to your friends for hours into like the early hours of the morning about the most random stuff. It's one of those life experiences that can't ever be replicated. And it's one of those life experiences that is just super valuable. And it's truly, I think, what living is. And people don't do it enough. You know, you got a couple drinks in you, or smoked a little bit, took an edible, whatever. And then all of a sudden your mind starts opening up or going into these places that sober you or daytime you would never even think to go to because you're busy with other things. You've got work on your mind, or your family on your mind, or you've got problems, bills to pay, things like that. And those real life problems distract you from these theoretical conversations. So you're starting to think about all this stuff, and then you bring it up to your friends who you're with, and they're like, yo, we've thought about this stuff too. And then all of a sudden, you're talking about everything. You're talking about the universe. You're talking about galaxies. You're talking about ancient aliens. You're talking about the meaning of life. You're talking about angels and demons and heaven and hell. And it's amazing. But I can say for certain that the things that these Princeton students were talking about are probably way out of my league of understanding. But I will do my best to explain it to you. And I'm sure that there's people out there who have probably majored in these things, who have studied these things for years. I have not. I'm not the best with like mathematical equations and stuff like that. So I have not studied this stuff. But I did spend an entire day reading everything I could about it and trying to understand. I mean, I was watching nuclear physicists for dummies videos, things like that. And I was frustrated to ask my family because at points I would scream and I'd be like, what? What are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. And I'd have to keep going back. So I did my best. I'm not a mathematical brain. But if you are more familiar with these topics, these subjects, this is a hive mind. We're a community of people who want to teach each other, who want to learn and grow. Please tell me in the comments, things that might help me clarify, things that might simplify it for me. And maybe we'll go live and talk about all this stuff because it's so interesting. So Everett challenged the accepted science of the time. The best ones always do. If no one ever challenged the accepted science of the time, we would still be walking around thinking the earth was flat, which some people do. No judgment, but some people still do. It's not. The Copenhagen interpretation was the first attempt to understand the world of atoms, and it was first posed by physicist Niels Bohr in 1920. And the basic premise claims that a quantum particle, it doesn't exist in one state or another, but in all possible states at once. It's only when we observe its state that a quantum particle is forced to choose one probability, and that is the state that we observe. Okay, so let's rewind really quickly. What is a quantum particle? This took me like an hour to learn, and I feel like it shouldn't have. The idea that everything is made of tiny, indivisible particles originated with the Greek philosopher Leucippus in the 5th century. He proposed that atoms are too small for humans to see. They're infinite, and they come in many varieties. Even though we can't see these tiny atoms, we see the products of them colliding together and creating something that can be seen. Quantum physics describes the smallest things in our universe, like molecules, atoms, electrons, protons, neutrons, etc. Our bodies, our pets, our furniture, the trees, the grass, the glass of milk you're drinking, the glass of Pepsi you're drinking, it's all made from quantum physics. The universe is random, and we can't know that anything is going to happen. We can only predict it using something called wave function, which you're going to have to depend on someone far smarter than myself to explain. So Niels Bohr's Copenhagen interpretation was theoretically proven by Viennese physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1935. And he did this by theoretically putting a cat inside a box with radioactive material and a Geiger counter, which would trigger a hammer that would break a bottle inside the box that contained hydrocyanic. So the way it would work is when the Geiger counter sensed that there was a decay in the radioactive material that was in the box with the cat, it would cause the hammer to break the bottle, which would then kill the cat with that acid. Now, when the cat was in the box, it existed in an unknowable state, since it was not being observed, which meant it could not be said whether the cat was alive or dead. The cat's fate was tied to a random event that may occur or may not occur. So Hugh Everett looked at this and he said, okay, what if this equation applies to everything, not just the objects being observed, but the objects we can't observe and the observers as well? That would mean that the universal wave function would contain branches for every alternative scenario for every person, animal, or object in the universe. Branches that act independently of each other and don't influence each other. They just journey on towards a different future. To put it simply, there could be an unknown number of yous out there, all making different choices and doing different things that propel them towards different lives. The leading scientific minds of the day, they recoiled from this theory. They could not accept that every decision we each make might create a new universe for all possible outcomes. That's millions, billions of parallel universes, of parallel yous. And if you're a narcissist, you're loving this idea right now. I mean, even if you're not, because it's cool. It's really cool. Max Tegmark, a professor at MIT, he's put forth the idea that there are 4 distinct types of parallel universes. And I'm only going to focus on one in this video because that's not what you came here for. But we're talking about the type 3 parallel universe. And this is the one that we are probably the most familiar with from like sci-fi books and movies. It's basically a mirrored universe. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics says that for every possible quantum option, there's another universe in which that option is realized. So if you're looking for a new job and you get 2 job offers, one from Starbucks and one from Dunkin' Donuts, you might choose to work at Starbucks, and that would be the good choice. But another you chooses to work at Dunkin' Donuts. That's crazy, right? So think about all the decisions that you've encountered throughout your life. Simple decisions like, do I put on the black boots today or the other black boots? There is a universe out there where another you is wearing the black boots you didn't choose. But obviously this applies to like bigger life decisions as well. Let's say you come to a fork in your life and you're like, okay, do I focus on my career or do I start a family? The you in this universe decides to start a family. And at that point, another universe is created with a you who chooses to not have children, to not start a family, and focus on their career. And we've seen a lot of movies where this whole premise is played out, and they don't necessarily say like, oh, this is about the multiverse or this is about parallel universes. But that's basically what it is. Like The Family Man with Nicolas Cage. Great movie. Nicolas Cage in this movie, his name is Jack. And he's this like high-powered businessman. He drives a fancy sports car. He's sleeping with models. He's got the leather furniture. He's got the big walk-in closet. He's got the apartment with like all windows overlooking the city. He's got it all, right? But then one morning he wakes up in bed next to a woman he hasn't seen for years. Her name is Kate, and she was Jack's college girlfriend. But he made a decision to go and take an internship, and Kate was worried that this would cause them to separate, to have distance between them. And he was like, no, no, no. But then he ends up choosing his career and this big fancy schmancy life over the love of his life. So he wakes up one morning and he's in bed with Kate. And then all these kids come jumping into their bed and he's like, what the hell is going on? And he looks out in the driveway and there's a minivan. And he's like, this is not my life. This is not my life. I don't want this. But the whole point is Jack was given this very unique, very special opportunity to see what his life would have been like had he made different choices. And I don't want to spoil the movie for you, but spoiler alert, he ends up liking the life he didn't choose. 13 Going on 30 is another one of these movies, one of the best movies ever. It is the movie I put on when I'm having a really bad day, when I'm feeling very sad and I need a little pick-me-up. Also, Bridget Jones's Diary, all 3. I'm not choosy. I'll start with the first one. I'll go through all 3 if it's an especially bad day with a bottle of wine. But 13 Going on 30, once again, follows Jennifer Garner. She's an awkward 13-year-old. She wants to be popular. She wants to date this popular boy at school, and she completely overlooks her best friend who's always there for her. And on her 13th birthday party, she basically ruins this friendship with this very good friend. And she goes to bed saying that she wishes she was a grown-up, basically. She wishes she was fun, flirty, and 30, because that's what she's reading in these magazines. And then she wakes up in the morning, once again, as hot-ass 30-year-old Jennifer Garner in this amazing apartment, wearing this, like, silk negligee with a big walk-in closet and the windows looking out at the city. And she's got, like, this obnoxious, like, muscle-bound boyfriend. And she's got this high-powered job at a magazine, the job of her dreams. But then she meets up with her old friend, played by an adorable Mark Ruffalo, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with her because who she became after her 13th birthday party was basically a mean girl, someone he didn't want to have anything to do with. And Jennifer Garner finds that everything she gained, everything she worked for was very shallow, and it didn't mean anything without the love of Mark Ruffalo next to her. And I think we can all agree, having some insight into what your life would be like if you'd made different choices would be incredibly amazing. So Over 13 billion years ago, everything was an infinite singularity. So the universe that we know began as an infinitely hot and dense single point before it burst into action, inflating and stretching at first incredibly fast, but then it slowed down, and it continues to expand to this day. As a consequence of this growth and what they call inflation, a massive fireball made of matter and radiation formed, creating atoms, molecules, stars, galaxies, and planets. And we know of this as the Big Bang Theory. Now, I'm not telling you have to believe it. I know people out there are religious and you believe in, God created the world and all that. And I am not saying that you're wrong, and I'm not saying the Big Bang Theory is right or wrong. There is scientific evidence of the Big Bang Theory, but I am completely on board with whatever y'all want to believe. I have no judgment. But if we go along with the Big Bang Theory, right, the process of inflation and the Big Bang have led many scientists to feel that multiple universes are not only possible, but probable. Cosmic inflation may have ended in our tiny little galaxy, but it continues on in other places. And when that inflation ends in a certain place, a new universe forms. Now, obviously, this was an incredibly dumbed down synopsis of many extremely complicated scientific theories, but hopefully it does give us an idea of how something like this might be possible, and considering how little we know about what's going on outside of our very small solar system, I'm not dismissing it, not at all. These are some of my favorite things to think about and contemplate when I, have a little something in me. But the next obvious question is, are we able to communicate with these other universes or see proof of their existence on our own plane? Some people argue that there is proof that these different realities sometimes overlap. So the Mandela effect is described as the collective misremembering of common events or details because in each universe, alternate versions of events and objects exist. So Nelson Mandela, who this Mandela effect was named for, he died in 2013. And when he died, a large amount of people were like, hold up, what? No, because they remembered him dying in prison in the 80s. They remembered news articles. They were thinking this whole time that he was dead. And then when they saw on the news that he was actually dead in 2013, they were like, no way. This is some psyop. This is some crazy stuff. Who's hiding what? What's going on here? And remember the peanut butter brand Jiffy? If you do, you're experiencing the Mandela effect because there never was a Jiffy peanut butter. The actual name of the peanut butter is Jif. But maybe in another universe, they're putting Jiffy peanut butter on their PB&Js as we speak. And is it the Berenstain Bears or the Berenstain Bears? Well, it's the latter. It's the Berenstain Bears. But I swear when I was a kid, I was reading about the Berenstain Bear family. And then when I started reading them to my kids later, much later, I was like, who are these Berenstain Bear imposters? Is this a knockoff version of the Berenstain Bears? And it's funny because after I wrote this video, I started watching Peacemaker on HBO Max. And I think maybe 4 episodes in, 2 of the characters start arguing about this. This is real. People actually remember reading Berenstain Bears, but it's the Berenstain Bears, which doesn't even make sense. Who would want their name to have stain in it? I'm not saying if your name has stain in it that you're a bad person or you suck or your name is bad. I'm just saying somebody wrote these books. Why would they choose Berenstain over Berenstein? And there are dozens of examples just like this. Is it Sex in the City or Sex and the City? That show with Carrie Bradshaw and Samantha and Miranda and Charlotte. They just tried to do a reboot of it that I've heard has been hugely unsuccessful, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Somebody posted on an internet forum, I remember it always being Sex in the City. Apparently it's never been Sex in the City. It's always been Sex and the City. Everyone I've asked about it remembers it the same as I do. What do you think? Now, obviously, doctors and scientists, they claim to have a reasonable explanation for this. They say it's confabulation. According to healthline.com, a common analogy for confabulation is honest lying. A person creates a false memory without intending to lie or deceive others. Instead, they're attempting to fill in gaps in their own memory. And while that is reasonable enough, I like to attribute these thousands of examples of the Mandela effect to the existence of parallel universes, because that's way more fun than confabulation, although confabulation is a very fun word to say. Confabulation. Okay, so the next question obviously is, could we possibly and accidentally enter one of these parallel universes? Some people believe we can, and some people have even claimed to have done so. One of the most interesting first-hand accounts I've heard of this phenomena is the case of Lorena Garcia, a 41-year-old woman who claimed that in 2008 she woke up one morning in an alternate reality of her life. The strangeness began when she noticed small details in her home that seemed different. The sheets on her bed were different than the ones she'd gone to sleep on the night before. And when she went down to the private car park where her vehicle was always parked, the car park wasn't even there. When she finally found her car parked across the street, Lena drove to the job that she'd worked at for 20 years. But when she reached her office door, her name was not on the door. It was someone else's name. It turned out that in this reality, she still worked in the same building, but in a different department. At this point, Lena lost it, understandably, and she went to the doctor thinking she was crazy. Her test came back negative for drugs and alcohol. She was talked to by psychiatrists, and she had no diagnosable mental health illness. But Lena still insisted that things about this life were different than the life she had been living for the past 41 years. She was in a relationship with a man she'd broken up with 6 months prior, and the man she'd been seeing for 4 months, he seemed to not even exist. Even after she hired a private investigator to try to track him down, the PI came back and was like, I don't know who this person is. I can't find him anywhere. In her account, Lena said, quote, "My own family does not remember things like an operation my sister had on her shoulder a couple months ago. Unfortunately, I do not remember many important things about television news, but the rest of the world seems to be the same," end quote. Lena's first language is Spanish, so the English translation of what she said is obviously a little off. She meant like she didn't remember things about current events, things that were happening in the news, things that were happening in the world. They weren't happening like that in the life she had been previously living. There's even some theories that you may be traveling or visiting a parallel universe every day and you don't even know it. For instance, when you go to find something that you're sure you left in one place, but it's not there, you may be experiencing a parallel universe. When you are sure that you bought a pair of shoes a couple of months ago, but now you can't find them in your closet, parallel universe. When you see someone out on the street and you recognize them and you say hi and they don't seem to recognize you, parallel universe. When you've had a fight with your husband and then when you talk about that fight later, he remembers it in a completely different way than how it happened, parallel universe. No, that's just marriage. That is just marriage. So, is it possible that the stairs in the woods, the ones that seem to appear out of nowhere and sometimes disappear as well, they could be glimpses into these other universes? They could be actual staircases and actual parallel universe houses. Because even though in our universe, no one's ever lived in these areas, in other universes, these areas could not be national parks at all. They could be actually settled areas. Is that why when people get close, they feel uneasy or hear sounds, but they can't pinpoint where those sounds are coming from? One of the staircase stories claims that a man and his friend, it's actually like a ranger and his trainee, they were hiking in the woods when they found themselves at the base of a set of these steps. The trainee, he climbed up the steps, even though the ranger was like, don't do that. And when the trainee reached the top of the steps, he put his hand out to grab onto a tree branch for support, at which point his hand was sliced off cleanly at the wrist. The wound began to bleed, and he had to be rushed to the hospital. But the strange thing was the hand was never found anywhere. This could be attributed to a glitch that happens when two parallel universes overlap for a brief moment in time. The man himself had not entered the parallel universe, but his hand did, which caused the hand to remain in the other world while his body stayed in this one. So if you're ever in your house and you're walking to your stairs to go downstairs and you see just a hand, a severed hand sitting at the top of your stairs, don't worry. It wasn't some crazy murder that happened. It's not something to call the police about. It's just somebody accidentally tried to climb your stairs in another universe and didn't realize what was going on and his hand got sliced off. Another possible theory connects to the well-known missing 411 phenomenon proposed by David Paulides. In the United States, there are more than 84 million acres of preserved woods, deserts, mountains, and other wilderness. And in the last 100 years, many people have gone missing from our national parks, and many of them have been small children. These cases are mysterious, as they share a lot of similarities. The missing people seem to vanish in an instant, and their absence is usually noticed early on, but they're nowhere to be found. Paulides estimates that over 1,600 people have vanished with no explanation in America's national parks, but the true number is impossible to nail down, considering that national parks do not collect data on how many people disappear within their parks. Paulides believes that the Park Services conceals the true number of missing persons because if people knew how common these disappearances were, they wouldn't want to visit the parks as often, which would severely cut down on money going to the state. Paulides claims that this was all brought to his attention by a park ranger who had asked him to look into the disappearances since Paulides had previously served in law enforcement. And he said, quote, "I sat in my room at the lodge and listened to the ranger tell me about a series of missing people inside our national parks. The ranger states that the events were very unusual. Many people were never found, and the Park Service was doing everything possible to keep a lid on the publicity surrounding the missing. He explained that non-law enforcement employees were not privy to all the information, but that the upper echelon law enforcement supervisors inside the Park Services, they were concerned about the numbers and certain facts surrounding specific cases." End quote. Now, Paulides doesn't think that there's some grand conspiracy to cover up the disappearances or that the Park Services is involved with these disappearances, but he believes it's kept quiet because they don't want to lose the revenue that these parks bring in, which is substantial. He ended up submitting a FOIA request to obtain the National Park Service list of unsolved missing persons cases, and he was told that he would be charged $1.4 million in fees for that material. So, just for some context, I have filed multiple FOIA requests myself. FOIA stands for Freedom of Information Act, and it means you can, ask the government, federal or local, for information about certain cases. And they have to give it to you, but they come up with creative ways to not give it to you. And one of those creative ways is charging you a shitload for the material. So they'll say to you, yeah, of course, thanks for your FOIA request. We'll get that stuff over to you right away. It's going to be $6,000, right? I've run into that before, especially for these very mysterious cases that people would like to keep on lockdown. They just ask for some crazy disproportionate amount of money, and then they say it's because they have to mail it or make copies or things like that. But come on. I've never ever been told that I would need to pay $1.4 million. To me, charging $1.4 million for this information is just a huge deterrent for anybody ever wanting to get that information. So basically, some people believe that the staircases could be possibly portals to a different universe, or even a portal to hell. Maybe not what we know as hell, but a place where there's evil people, an evil and ancient civilization of people that prey on the human beings of our plane. And maybe these people use the stairs to enter our reality for enough time to take a child or take a person or take a hunter, and then they take that person back to their plane. Now, these people aren't getting their hands cut off because they are in the company of somebody who's from that universe. And I know this all sounds crazy, but hey, these are the theories that are out there, so I'm just putting them down for you. And there are multiple cases of children that go missing and end up surviving. But when they come home, they have strange stories to tell, or they're found miles away from where they went missing, which is an inexplicable thing to consider since they are young children who are often not dressed for the elements. They're not trained in the art of surviving the wilderness for an extended period of time, and they're little, so they really can't travel rough terrain, rocky mountainous areas for miles and miles, but they're found miles away from where they went missing. And of course, I'm going to tell you about a couple of these cases now, just so you don't think I'm making it up. Catherine Van Elst was 8 years old when she vanished in the Ozarks while camping with her family. She was in Devil's Den State Park, which is located in Arkansas, and it covers 2,500 acres of land. And this land is dotted with caves, bluffs, and rough mountainous terrain. On June 16, 1946, Catherine, her father, and her two older brothers left their cabin in the park and ventured down to a nearby creek where there were other children who were swimming and playing. The three Van Alst children, they jumped right in, and they began swimming and splashing around while their father sat on the banks and watched. Now, Catherine ended up in a deeper section of the creek near a wall that basically separated the creek from the dam on the other side. And a woman, another parent who was standing nearby watching her children, she noticed that little Catherine was having trouble navigating the deeper water. So the woman reached in and helped Catherine out of the water. Once the girl was safely on dry land, the woman spoke to her briefly to make sure that she was okay and, to warn her to stay out of the deeper water if she wasn't that strong of a swimmer. And Catherine's father, seeing his daughter speaking to a stranger, he obviously got concerned. He called out to Catherine and the woman, who was a mother, and she understood why he was worried. She turned away from Catherine for a moment to let Catherine's dad know that everything was okay. And once he had confirmation that this strange woman wasn't in the process of kidnapping his daughter, he turned his attention back to his other two children before glancing back over to see where Catherine was, because he'd assumed that once Catherine was out of the water and done talking to the woman, she would walk over to him. But Catherine was gone. In the 30 seconds that his eyes had been off of her, 8-year-old Catherine seemed to have simply vanished. So Catherine's father began calling her name. He ran over to the area he'd last seen her in, which wasn't far. It was a couple, dozen feet away. And within minutes, others who were at the swimming area, they also began calling her name and searching for her. But after an hour of getting no response and not finding her, Catherine's father called the police. For 2 days, the police and search and rescue teams scoured the park, and they worried that maybe the young girl had somehow managed to climb up onto the dam wall and then fall into the dam and drowned. So the water in the dam was drained, but Catherine wasn't there, and they returned to searching the forest. No one could understand how in less than a minute this 8-year-old girl had completely vanished. If she'd wandered away, she would have still been within earshot when her father was looking for her and calling her name, but there was no sign of her. 5 days later, a small search party was looking for Catherine 7 miles away from the dam where she had vanished. As they approached a cave, yelling her name, Catherine, wearing only a bathing suit, she walked calmly out of the cave and simply said, "Here I am." They said she was eerily calm, and she was physically fine, aside from some scratches and bug bites. But when she was asked at the hospital what had happened, Catherine said she didn't really know. She couldn't really remember. She said when the searchers had arrived, it was as if she had just woken up from a dream. Catherine said she didn't remember leaving the swimming area. She didn't remember walking anywhere. She didn't remember wandering off. She only remembered sleeping on warm, soft grass the first night. And then she woke up in this cave on day 6. This 8-year-old girl had managed to survive for 6 days in the wilderness, wearing only a swimsuit, with no shoes, no protection from the elements, and no source of food. The strange thing was, even though there was no source of drinkable water nearby, Catherine seemed to be well hydrated, even though she had lost a few pounds. Authorities determined that although the cave where Catherine was found was 7 miles away from the dam and the swimming area, that was 7 miles as the crow flies. So Catherine wouldn't have been able to get from the dam to the cave in like a straight shot. She couldn't have just walked 7 miles to the cave. There were hills, dense trees that you couldn't get through, and things that she would have needed to go up and around if she wanted to get to the cave. Authorities determined that the real distance Catherine must have traveled in order to end up in that cave was 30 miles. And she did this barefoot and in a bathing suit. On April 29th, 2001, 6-year-old Haley Zaga was hiking with her grandparents in the upper Buffalo Wilderness area of the Ozarks. It's a very remote area. You can't drive there. You can only walk in. And Haley had wanted to go for a walk and see the wildflowers. So she and her grandparents, they followed a trail to the top of a bluff about 200 feet up to an overlook, where they took a rest and enjoyed the beautiful view spanning out beneath them But when they turned around to return to civilization, little Haley spotted a waterfall off the path that they were walking on, and she begged her grandparents to go and see it with her. The only problem was this waterfall, it wasn't easily accessible at all. This is a very rough area, very rough terrain. The waterfall was located down like a steep cliff, like a steep ravine. And the only way to get there would be to climb a tree down. So like this very tall tree, the top of it was reaching the path where Haley and her grandparents were on, and the base of it was by the waterfall. So you'd have to like get on this tree, like the top of the tree, and then climb all the way down. That's bananas, Haley. So Haley's grandparents, they obviously said no because they didn't think it would be safe for her, and they didn't think that they would be able to physically manage it. And Haley did what small children do when they're told no and they don't get their way. She threw a fit, and she refused to walk another step until she was allowed to go see the waterfall. After trying to reason with her for a few minutes, Haley's grandparents decided to use reverse psychology. And they were like, all right, Haley, if you want to stay here alone in the middle of nowhere, that's fine. But we're going to keep going. We're going to go home. We're going to get some lunch. We're going to have some hot cocoa, watch a movie. But you can stay here. Now, the grandparents did keep walking, but they didn't go far. And they kept glancing back to make sure that Haley was still there because they expected her to get scared of being left alone and follow them. And Haley did follow them. She started walking. But she did so begrudgingly, like dragging her feet, staring down and pouting, and walking as slowly as possible. Her grandparents kept glancing back to make sure she was still there, which she was, until she wasn't. When Haley's grandparents realized that the little girl was not following them down the path anymore, they ran back. They started screaming her name. Initially, they thought that she was just being a little brat and hiding from them. But after 90 minutes of calling for her, and the sun started going down, and they tried everything from bribery to threats, the grandparents realized she must have gotten lost. She must have wandered off the path, and so they called the police. The search for Haley Zago was the largest search and rescue operation in Arkansas history. They brought in 8 dog teams, hundreds of searchers on foot, helicopters, even the National Guard. But there was no sign of Haley, even though one of the dogs did track her scent to a nearby road, causing police to believe that someone had abducted her and made off with her in a vehicle. 51 hours later, a search team who had wandered outside of the primary search area, they saw Haley sitting by a brook with her toes dangling in the water 2 miles away from where she'd gone missing. When Haley saw them coming, she looked up and smiled at them and waved at them. She was perfectly fine and healthy, but the story she told was bizarre. Haley claimed she'd been walking behind her grandparents and she was staring down at the ground and pouting when suddenly she looked up and she no longer saw her grandparents or the path she had been walking on. She was suddenly faced with a wall of trees, and all she saw were trees, every direction she looked. Haley claimed that she continued walking, hoping to find the trail again, but she never did. And when it got dark, Haley fell asleep on the same bluff that she'd been at that day with her grandparents. And when she woke up, she went down, found a river, which she followed. The river led her to a cave where she stopped and took a rest in, and then she went back out to the water, and that was where she was found. The only issue was, people had been searching for her. They'd searched the bluff. They'd searched all of these areas. A helicopter had flown over that bluff like a ton of times, and this helicopter had thermal technology on it, like heat-seeking technology. And during the 50-plus hours that she was gone, the helicopter flew over the bluff and didn't see any heat signatures. They didn't see her. So the police asked Haley, are you sure that it was the same bluff you were at with your grandparents that you spent the night on? And she answered simply yes, because that was where Alicia had told her to sleep. Haley said Alicia was a new friend she'd met in the woods. Alicia was a little 4-year-old girl with black hair and brown eyes, and she'd kept Haley company during her time in the wilderness by telling her jokes and singing her songs. Haley said that it was Alicia who had shown her the way to the bluff and shown her how to get down into the river the next morning. And then Haley even sang some of the songs that Alicia had taught her for the police and for the doctors. And she even told them a couple of Alicia's jokes. Haley's story made national news, including her claim that this little 4-year-old girl, Alicia, had helped keep her safe until search and rescue arrived. Some people who read this story, they found it intriguing, Obviously, it's very intriguing. And they did some research, and they discovered that a 4-year-old girl had gone missing in that same area 23 years prior. This little girl's name was Elena, not Alicia, but she did have black hair and brown eyes, and she'd lost her life on those bluffs. Haley has told her story many times since, and she insists that she's not making this up. She never had an imaginary friend before Alicia, and she never had one after. But whatever the explanation is, she credits Alicia with saving her life that day. She said from the moment she was lost to the moment she was found, Alicia was with her, protecting her, guiding her. And Haley wants us to know that she's never lied about anything or embellished any part of her story.
Something that people ask a lot is, were you scared? And honestly, no. I was too young to really understand the gravity of the situation. I think I was at the best and worst age, I guess, because I was old enough that I had some kind of, I formed a plan. I was old enough to form a plan, but too young to understand the gravity of the situation. I think if I had been any younger, I would have just sat down and cried, and if I had been any older, I probably would have known not to keep moving. So kind of exactly the right or exactly the wrong age. Something else that I get asked a lot is about Alicia, and so I guess I'll get into that now. From the moment that I knew I was lost until the moment I was found, I had an imaginary friend who was with me the entire time. And I was never a kid who had imaginary friends before that, and I haven't had any since. It's important for me not to define what she was. Some people say that she was a ghost. Some people say she was a guardian angel. I had someone message me on Facebook asking me if I thought she was an alien. I've seen, like, not Reddit, but like forums where people talk about what they think she was. Okay, side note, I gotta say, it is bonkers to read people on the internet talking about my story, like, as if I'm not, I don't know, as if they don't ever expect that I'll read it, which they probably don't, and that's fine. Like I said, it's important for me not to define what she was. She was a really calming presence. She actually helped me on the first day find my way, find the only safe way to get to the river. Like I said earlier, where the trail was, where I was lost, was above the river on bluffs that are about 200 feet tall. And she helped me navigate down those bluffs. I somehow miraculously found the only way to get to the river safely. And it was because of this presence, this imaginary friend that I had. So I'm grateful to that imaginary friend. It's important for me not to define what she was. I always called her an imaginary friend, and that's what I'm always going to call her. Spirit, guardian angel, psychological phenomenon, what have you. She was with me, she kept me calm, she played games with me. She was there for me the entire time.
Now, of course, the more reasonable people come in, try to ruin this for us, and they say, listen, the stairs in the woods, they're just simply left over from homes that once stood there before. Maybe the homes were demolished or they crumbled due to age and neglect. The staircase is the strongest part of a house, and that's the one that's often left over when the home is gone. So they're saying, maybe there's no people who are living there now, but people could have lived there 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and their staircases just stayed. Now, these people can't explain how these wooden staircases would still be in good condition and not completely rotted. And they also can't explain how many people who have claimed to have seen these staircases in real life, they say there's no basement, no cellar, no foundation, just the staircases. Since I personally have not seen them myself, I can't confirm or deny these claims. But if that's true, it would suggest that there had never been a house built around the stairs. There'd be some sign that there'd been a house there, not just stairs and grass and trees around it. And that is really creepy if it's true. And honestly, I don't know how much I believe of this story. There are pictures of some of these alleged stairs that can be found online, and there's thousands upon thousands of personal accounts of people who claim to have seen them. It kind of makes me want to go off into my national parks, because we have tons here in upstate New York, and see if I can find some staircases. Like, a part of me wants to do that, and a part of me is like, no, you don't. You don't actually want to do this. Shut up, Stephanie. You don't even want to leave your house, much less go wandering around in some national park looking for spooky, mysterious staircases that may or may not lead to a parallel universe. What I do know, though, is this was so much fun to look into, and this has let my mind roam to all sorts of possibilities, and it's led me to all different paths and avenues, and led me to discover and find out such cool things that really didn't even make it into this video, that weren't relevant into this video, like this one story I read, and it's a real story about a real person, but it was so intriguing, so cool, so like entertaining. One of those stranger than fiction stories, but it's true. And I do want to make a video about this story that I read, about this woman that I read about. So cool. I want to do that. But this whole staircase in the woods thing, very spooky, very interesting to read about. Very interesting to just ponder all the possibilities. Like, some people even say that there's like this huge, intricate cave system under our national parks. And there's like a group of people, like a society of people who went underground, decades ago or generations ago, and they've remained underground, and they've sort of become like feral and cannibalistic. And that sometimes people who go missing in the woods with this missing 411 thing, they're being taken by this cannibalistic society. There was this one story I read where this woman said she was camping in the woods in a national park with her husband and her 3 children, and they were just sort of sitting out on the deck, and there's all these forests around them, and then they started hearing like screams coming from the forest, screams of people yelling, saying they're coming to kill us, they're trying to get us. They heard a woman crying and speaking to what they assumed was her child, saying, just know I'll always love you, things like that. They were hearing like screams and shrieks, people running through the woods. They got terrified. They called the police. The police came and checked and found nothing. And some people say it's because this cannibalistic, like hills have eyes society took these people and brought them down to their caves to eat them. So, I mean, it's crazy, right? But crazier things have happened, I suppose. And I will say, though, if I'm ever walking in the woods and I come upon one of these staircases, I will be completely in awe. I'll think it's cool as hell, but I will not be going anywhere near them, just in case. And I would give you the same advice. Stand there, look at it, say, that's cool, take a picture if you want, send it to me, definitely, but maybe don't go near them, just in case, just to be on the safe side. So what do you guys think about these stairs in the woods? Have you ever seen one of them yourself? Do you think it was just an urban legend run wild, started by someone who was bored and decided to flex their creative writing skills online? Do you think there could be something more to it, something more than meets the eye? Maybe something strange and unusual? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, stay safe, stay beautiful, and stay strange. Bye.
Well, the levee don't break now, and the bottle's going straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's killing you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood